Peace and love, ladies and gentlemen. It's your brother Garfield, the Brother Garfield podcast, where we bring scholarship. All we do is bring scholars to bring out the right scholarship. Today we have the gentleman who is a philologist. He goes by the name of Jonathan Winnerman. Jonathan Winnerman is an academic administrator in ancient studies at UCLA and works closely with the governance board to support global antiquity. He's a specialist in ancient Egyptian philology, from Old Egyptian through Coptic and visual culture. He first joined UCLA as a lecturer in Egyptology before becoming a part of the global antiquity. Since joining the institute, he has contributed to several successful grant projects and invites interested faculty to reach out to him to have advantages of these services. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Jonathan Winnerman. And of course, I have my partner, not in crime, my partner, Brother Ankh, in this scholastic fight that we're going through in this community. This is definitely my partner. We have intellectual guns blazing every day. He's dealing with these crazy. But Jonathan Winnerman, welcome to my channel. And I was looking for a group of philologists to deal with the language of ancient Egypt. And you're one of the first persons that came up on Google. So that's how I ended up sending you an email and asking you to come on. But we had Kara Cooney on a couple of weeks ago, and of course she's the head of the UCLA Department of Egyptology, and wonderful person, wonderful individual. She did a great interview, caused a lot of uproar. You know, people twisted her words and so forth. So I want to welcome you to the platform and welcome. Hopefully we get to do something again. This is not the first and the last, and hopefully you enjoy the interview and you'll want to come back. All right. Yeah. All right. So my first question, because usually I'm silent when it comes to the Egyptologists, you know. So let me shut Ankh up for a minute. All right. What does the term Kemet, on a basic understanding, what does it mean from a philologist perspective?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. And maybe one thing that I should say, just as a kind of caveat to all of these things. So when we describe myself as a philologist, that essentially means that I'm a humanist. And what that means is complicated, but what I should definitely say that it does not mean is I'm not a scientist. So I don't usually deal in absolutes, and usually I'm suspicious of absolutes. What we instead try to practice in our work is kind of a process of both knowing and unknowing at the same time. So you kind of learn as much as you can, get as much training in something as you can, know how to interpret the primary sources to the best of your ability, but then also at the same time recognize that there's many, many factors that make whatever interpretation that you have at the end of the day not the final word on any matter. So there are personal biases that enter. There are just the inability to actively capture the living situation of an individual that has been dead and not able to correctly or not able to communicate in their own words for thousands of years. This is kind of, so there's kind of a constant, almost like a yoga that goes on of balancing between kind of knowledge and also the limitations of knowledge in whenever we're talking about ancient material, which is, I think, also what makes it so interesting. And what makes it so powerful, but also why we should then sometimes be suspicious of kind of the desire to kind of get a definitive answer on any kind of subject. But now that I got my little kind of rant out of the way, let me focus on your question, which was, I believe it was, what does Kemet actually mean, or was it what does Kemetiyu mean?
Kemet.
Kemet, literally, so Kemet is based on the Egyptian verb kem, which by itself, kem, the Egyptians didn't write vowels. So when we're saying kem, we're assuming a kind of short E between the K and the M, but really what we just have is K and M, but we pronounce it as kem for convenience sake. What kem means is it's an adjective verb, which means to be black. When you stick a feminine T on the end, so that's what these final T's are. They're kind of feminine markers. And they can mean a few different things based on because the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic script, the Medu Neter, is based on both phonetic signs and then kind of classificatory signs, which are sometimes called determinatives, but basically which kind of ground the semantic dimension of the word. So it's important to kind of take both of these into account. So by itself, Kemet, depending on the classifier that follows it, can either mean the feminine black thing. So it could mean if there is, for example, an image of a seated woman after, it could mean the black woman. If there's an image of a cow, it could mean a black cow. It could also, however, they also use the feminine for the abstract. So not to say the specific feminine black thing, but instead that which is black. So the idea of kind of, again, like the idea of blackness, or kind of, the land which is black if you're writing a settlement determinative after it. So that's usually, I think that's kind of what the question that you're alluding to now. Kemet, that is often translated as Egypt, literally means the black thing, or with the appropriate classifier, the black land or the black place.
Okay. All right. Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. What about as far as we have different words and different terminologies that's used on a daily basis with the KM. And have you found there's a lot of conversations or arguments about black people, right? Did the Egyptians use terminologies in how we refer to it as black people today? Did they use terminology in that sense?
Not really how I understand it. And I also think I have perhaps a kind of reason why I don't see the Egyptians describing kind of the one specific black people. I just also don't think that would kind of make sense in an African context, where you're not only are you dealing with people from of course you're dealing with people from the ancient Mediterranean, people from West Asia, but you're also dealing with a lot of different people from Africa, from West Africa, from from very far south in Africa, from maybe nomadic tribal groups in the deserts. So there's not really, if the Egyptians would even be in a mindset to describe people in terms of their skin color, there are many, many different cultures that they would have been interacting with that would fit that bill. So then I don't think it's necessarily that surprising that we don't see the Egyptians kind of have one specific terminology for people that are, as we would understand them today, black.
All right. Did the Egyptians look at people and think of them as color? Like if you look at, I think it's Ramesses III, you have all these different people from the Libyans, you have the so-called Nubians, you have the Ramesh, you have other people. Did they look at them as, is that a way to say differentiating? Because I see a lot of folks in the community, whether they claim to be Hebrew Israelites or people who support or love ancient Kemet, they will use that as saying, hey, this is them saying they know different people in different colors. What do you say as a response to that?
I mean, I would say as a response to that, of course, to some extent, they did know different people and different colors. Like this is the experience that we all have as people. The way that the Egyptians stereotyped, though, was not first and foremost based on color. It was more based on kind of, again, cultural stereotypes. So if you were, we actually have some really interesting depictions, and also the way that this was negotiated probably changed over time. So the examples that I'm going to give to you now are not the definitive final word on the matter. But we do have examples of some people that that we know are from Nubia. So we can probably assume were, as we would understand people today, black. That in certain contexts, for example, when they are shown in their official capacity as a kind of representative of a Nubian official, will show themselves as with black skin. But then in other capacities, when they're in their tomb and showing themselves just as a member of the honored deceased, will not show themselves with the same shade of black skin, will show themselves in a manner that we'd kind of expect to see from any tomb owner in ancient Egypt. So I would say in this case that color, as the Egyptians understand it, particularly skin color, is less a reflection of reality as we know it, and more kind of a reflection of a cultural stereotype that is also associated with dress, with perhaps language, with culture more generally.
All right, so let me put you on the hot seat for a quick second here. Don't get burnt up now. All right. The ancient Egyptians were black. How do you respond to that?
So it's interesting because I think that's not a very controversial statement. Because certainly there were, I think it's, again, undeniable, there probably were ancient Egyptians that were black. But as we know from any culture, any state, especially, maybe not culture, but state especially, any state contains a diversity of peoples. So some of them were, I don't think that's a wrong answer, but I don't think it's the only answer, is kind of a way that I would put it. It's certainly more accurate than to say the ancient Egyptians were white.
I was just about to ask you that. All right. So now let me ask you this.
Well, let me also, sorry, I should follow up on this, because of course now, as you know, you mentioned that you talked with Kara, and I'm sure that this is something that came up, but you know, we're not now talking about categories that don't have value judgments. And value judgments in the modern day, and value judgments in the modern day in ways that we, as people that don't live in contemporary Northeast Africa, might not understand. So if, for example, we were in the contemporary state of Egypt, and we said that the ancient Egyptians were black to a contemporary Egyptian, they would understand this statement as very, very differently than the way that I am understanding it as a white American, or that we perhaps are all understanding it as Americans of you know, different ilks. So there's much more hostility towards that kind of statement. And a lot of this is based on racism. A lot of it is also based on a colonial experience. So it's a very complicated.
Yeah, and for the record, whoever watches this interview, I don't know where Ankh stands as far as ultimately, but I don't know if he's going to agree with me or disagree with me. But I said the ancient Egyptians had different skin tones, ranging from dark brown to light brown, and they had different phenotypes. You know, they could look different ways, different anyway, but they pretty much are Africans. You know, at the end of the day, they could come in different shades, and they could look different way. They could look like, they could have my nose, they could have Jonathan's nose, they could have Ankh's nose. It doesn't matter. But they are basically Egyptians. So it is what it is. All right. And you see it also in the diversity of the genetic makeup, what they've found so far. You find the H4 for the woman a lot. You find R1 being the 18th dynasty. You find different genetic markers all over the place. All right. It's because different people. And this is from pre-dynastic times, because they're mixing up. It's like New York. I live in New York. New York, you got everybody. You got Germans, French, Haitians, Jamaicans, African Americans. You got everybody. I'm a New Yorker now. I'm from Jamaica, but I'm a New Yorker. You know, so that's how I look at Egypt. I don't know if Ankh would agree with that. Ankh, you want to add on?
Yeah, I always say that that the Nile Valley culture is indigenous to Africa, indigenous Africans, and depending on the ones that live closer to the Mediterranean, would coalesce more with people in the Mediterranean, and people that live closer to the south would coalesce more with people in Nubia and Sudan. It's a range right there. That's what I would say. Now, me personally, I would not use the term Black people, because that was introduced during colonialism, and I feel like to capture the essence of who they was, they Africanness, right? I would prefer to call them, Africans, or what their name actually was. I think that actually that leads more to us actually understanding how they live their lives and how they participate in the world around them. That would be my personal stance.
All right. I noticed in the 6th dynasty, there's usage of the term Kem by itself. I don't remember what glyphs or whatever, but I remember reading that. But let me ask you this: the term Kemet is known to us from, I think, the end of the 11th dynasty to the 12th dynasty. We see the introduction. Why would, if they wanted it to mean Black people, why would they wait until the 12th dynasty to say, hey, we're the Black people? Did they just get into town? And because I know it's Semitic folks, Asiatics coming in at that time a lot. I don't know about the people that's quote unquote Egyptians or natives or indigenous people coming in at the 12th dynasty. Like, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We have a new people here, Kemet. We're coming in. Why would they name Kemet if it means Black people? This is just hypothetical, of course. Why would they name themselves at that time?
Yeah, I guess I don't really have a response to that because I guess I'm as confused by the leading question as you are. But I would also say you mentioned that during the 11th dynasty and especially during the later 12th and 13th dynasty, we do know we have a lot of kind of groups coming into Egypt from West Asia, particularly. This is also something that we see as early as the pre-dynastic period. So if you look at kind of the kind of initial kind of cultural materials from the north of the country as opposed to the south, the south kind of the Badari culture is as you mentioned, the Nakada culture. This is pretty undeniably an African kind of material culture. But if you look at a lot of the material that's coming in the north, a lot of it has very close connections with what's going on in West Asia at the time. Not surprisingly. But the Egyptians during this time, this is not a foundation. It's, as you said, like this is a moment of foundation. But in this moment of foundation, in this moment of state myth making, they do not choose to kind of employ these terms. Of course, our documentation, again, this is now where the humanist in me needs to chime up and say that we can't speak in absolutes because our documentation from the Old Kingdom is more limited than it is for other periods. So, maybe they did, but it certainly doesn't appear that way in the evidence that survives for us.
As far as geography is concerned, we definitely can't speak in absolutes. But I notice the term Kemet, whenever we have a conversation in our community, people get offended when we use Egypt. And I think Egypt, geography-wise, is totally different than what Kemet was. Is Kemet a set location, or is it the same size as what Egypt is today?
That's a great question. And we don't exactly, so to answer the question, we don't exactly know what Kemet was when the Egyptians talk about it to mean the country that they lived in. But it was certainly dramatically different from what we understand as the borders of modern Egypt today. This is probably for a variety of reasons. The first is that the idea of borders, as again, that you look at any map. I actually hate maps more than anything else. Like they're very helpful, but they're so misleading. Think of how they imply kind of almost a Trumpian vision of the world where there's kind of, this like wall, like separating everyone into their own little sphere. Not only is it Trumpian, but it's also really based on kind of, this ethno-nationalism of the 1800s and 1900s in Europe. So I think this is really kind of a damage that continues to be done to all our minds and all our possibilities by maps. Exchange across borders was always fluid. What constitutes a border was very different. I think we have in certain periods of Egyptian history, maybe certain lines, individual lines where pharaohs come in and say, hey, there is now a border here. But it's very clear that even this border is not fully within their control and that they're kind of trying to impose a kind of absolutist authority or an authoritarian authority in an exchange or in a space of exchange where people from Egypt and people from Nubia are kind of moving across and they want to prevent this. So this is kind of one side of it. The other side of it can go down to what Kemet itself means, which is that which is black or the black land. And this implies probably, again, if it's not implying a skin color thing, then it's probably implying some type of connection with the black soil of the Nile and the inundation, in which case this would mean the Nile Valley. But if it means the Nile Valley, then it wouldn't necessarily mean the Eastern Desert or the Red Sea coast where, you can go and have a lovely beach holiday these days. So that would probably not have included in the borders of ancient Egypt. Even the city of Alexandria, which is today, Egypt's second city, much as LA, where I'm based, is to New York. But it's when they founded it, in the Greek sources, they don't call it Alexandria in Egypt. They call it Alexandria by Egypt or Alexandria near Egypt. So they're not even understanding the modern city of Alexandria at its founding to lie within what are imaginary boundaries of Egypt.
Let me ask you this. How do you, and this is putting on your philology hat for a minute now, how do you get the conclusion of black land based on the words Kemet.
Do I still have my? Oh no, I had a whiteboard here from when I was teaching remotely where I draw hieroglyphs on. But the black land, it's kind of a convention because it's very true. So there are very specific signs for land that they use, which is kind of like this long oval or long kind of like oval, more like a long line with then 3 dots under it. And this is not the determinative that we get. Instead, we get a kind of circle with a cross through it.
Right.
Yeah. And basically what this is it's determining kind of what we think of as a bird's eye view of a city. So kind of you see a city with the enclosure wall around it, and then the 4 or the kind of 2 main streets which intersect at the second. So basically this is just talking about that which is black and an urban environment of some kind.
All right. The other day I got an email, right? And the email had to do with the papyri that we were looking at earlier with Sesostris III, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had some scholars look at it, right? And one of the scholars that looked at it, she responded. I'm gonna read her response, a little bit of it. She said, "Hi Garfield. Thanks. It does help because I spent almost an hour yesterday trying to find the word in those photos from that UCL. Didn't even bother to label with page numbers without finding the word. And now I know why. The word is almost entirely a reconstruction, and you can see it from my screenshot. Literally half the Kim sign and half the T sign remain in tiny fragments on the papyrus, and the rest is in square brackets, which means that it has been reconstructed by the editor. This means that it is a very poor example for the word. It could have been another word completely, or the word Kemet, Black Land, Nile Valley without the people. We will never know, right? So now let me put this on the screen, the actual image that I sent her, and I want to give you the opportunity to talk about this while we're actually recording. All right?
Sure.
Give it your best shot. I don't know if I'm trying to get you today. I don't know if I'm gonna get you today, but I'm gonna try. All right. You the scholar, but let me see what I could do. All right, here we go. So we have this on the screen right here, right? And what's happening is that there's a lot of circulation going around regarding these actual texts. So what she's talking about is this brackets right here in the line 4. What do you say about this stuff that she's talking about?
So again, I have a lot of kind of philological comments to make, but I think before we launch into the really complex way that I think we as not only as scholars, but also kind of just people that are partaking in the current media landscape need to think about citations and kind of evidence that we're presented, is we need to always kind of think critically of it, as kind of the scholar that you were quoting from in their email mentioned very nicely. Before we get into this, though, I would direct our attention elsewhere in the text. So if we can just move the focus a bit to the column on our right.
Okay.
Because then we can see that we do have the word clearly in line 3 and line 5.
Hold on 1 second. For some reason you froze. All right, so let me pause this.
Your programs, Garfield, remember?
Right. All right, go ahead, my brother.
So the one thing that I wanted to say before we delve into the complexities of the kind of what a restoration means and how seriously or how critically we should be thinking about a restoration, I'd also like to just point out that one of the valid kind of ways of looking at a restoration is also to look at other portions of the text. So, for example, if we're just talking about this word and whether we should believe that this word appears in the text, fortunately, our answer there is somewhat easy because it does appear elsewhere in the text. Again, if we understand the restoration correctly. So if we just are looking at the word kemetiu and we're just looking for evidence of that, if we go to, as I'm reading on your screen, plate 3, and we count down to the 3rd line under plate 3, and then the 5th line under plate 3, we see the kemetiu group written clearly without being, located in an area of damage or an area of speculation. We see it very clearly. So that's kind of one kind of anchor of certainty that we can kind of ground ourselves on. But now to go back to the actual the line that you were mentioning, which is plate 2, line 1, 2, 3, 4, line 4. So anytime you see square brackets, what this usually means is this is a part of text that is a part of an ancient text that is lost, but the area within it has been reconstructed by the editor in a way that they believe is justified. And presumably also the way that kind of others in the field would agree is justified. In this case, where if you notice that the bracket on your right is kind of bisecting both the first glyph on the top and the first glyph on the bottom. The first glyph on the top, by the way, is the biliteral K and M sign, so chem. And then the glyph on the bottom is your T. So that's how we get chemet. If it's bisecting them, that it probably indicates that some of it is restored, whereas other elements of it might be visible on the papyrus itself. So that there is a good indication, or that the editor feels comfortable enough making the restoration based on the traces that are there. However, if you really kind of, again, want to continue to dive in on this question, then the next thing that you should do is you should look for the actual hieratic text that this editor has that this editor has used to produce this hand copy. Which, if you like, I'll hold up the edition that I just happened to have.
Bring up yours, Ankh. Bring up yours.
Okay. Yeah, I want to see his first. I want everybody to see the book. That's a good book. See, I love books.
Where is it?
Yep, there you go.
Yeah. So we're dealing with this group right over here, which you can see is clearly written in the hieratic, but which there's hash marks over it. So again, this is helpful, but it still indicates that, because we don't know how the hash marks indicate damage or indicate loss, but we don't know how much loss it might indicate without looking at the picture. Okay. So now we need to also then go to the picture of the papyrus itself. And I think
all right, there you go. You put it up, Garfield.
Yeah, there you go.
Amazing.
Okay.
And if you see, I don't, if from where the mouse is, if you count down, that's line 1, 2, 3,
4.
Yep.
Right.
And if you can see that, in fact, the text is pretty heavily lost. Now, so then this might make us a bit more skeptical of the reconstruction. Okay. However, it is also, again, as we continue to talk about knowing and unknowing, it is also possible that the text has decayed since it was first translated. And so maybe there was more there that the editor had initially seen that is not there anymore. But you can see, if you go all the way to the right, you can maybe see what is the top of the sign below, actually.
Okay.
No, sorry, the in between those, the little black, right there. Okay. So that could very well be the top of a chem sign. And then the little bit of ink down into your, right there is presumably then the flange that comes off of that sign. So that, again, looks reasonable to me. But there is considerably less there than one might expect from the reconstruction.
That's a good way. That's a good way to put it. I like it. I like a good way to put it.
That's a good one. Oh, okay. So
I can say different because I'm not the scholar. I'm not the one with the PhD or the doctor behind my name.
Okay, and that's the famous glyphs. Wait. Do we have the famous one everybody likes to use? Do we got that, Garfield, with the seated?
Yes.
You got that? Put that one up so we can really get into it. As we get into the meat of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it
real clarity.
So this is this one that we see a lot of
everybody fighting over. They fighting over.
They're fighting over this glyph. They're fighting.
There you go. Okay.
They are fighting.
They fight.
This is what the reconstruction, based off the reconstruction, they got.
Okay.
Right now, people are speaking about this in absolute, Jonathan. Like, yes, this means black people. They're stopping the video with you talking, saying, you heard what he said? And they saying, hey, this is what the meaning of Kemet, black people, and they're using the cattle. Oh, before we get to this, we got to go to the cattle first. Before this,
but this is the cattle first.
Yeah, we got to do the cattle because the cattle is what they're using to say, hey, you see, if the cattle says X, Y, and Z, why don't this mean black?
Well, I got it. I got it. Let me put
I got it
up.
right here. So this saying that this means black cattle, but you brought out something earlier that this is actually a what?
Yeah, so this is a word. So if they just wanted to say black cattle, meaning male and female cattle, they would have just been able to say chem, so or chemu. So there would have been no T. You see, there's the kind of like this this initial sign, and then there's an owl, and then there's a kind of half circle. This is the half circle is the T. If they, excuse me, if they just wanted to say black cattle, there would be no T. What the T indicates is that they're talking about a feminine thing. And in this case, they're probably talking about cows, specifically female cows. So cows that are, you know, they're not bulls. So you can keep a lot of them together. They're not going to be, you know, necessarily violent, and they're not going to kind of, you know, challenge each other for dominance. They're going to be cows that produce milk, that are very, very, you know, convenient to have in a domestic context, that then when it becomes time to kind of create offspring, you just bring in a single male bull of whatever color that you want, and then kind of he mates with all the females, and then you move him away so that, you know, he's not a problem or a distraction. So I think that's how I would translate this word, as black cows or black female cattle, rather than black cattle in general.
Okay.
Wow. Hold up. That changed the game totally, because they were saying this is the black cattles as in plural. And then since this sign looks similar to the other sign, this means black people. So that's where the argument is. Mm-hmm. The argument right here.
Well, so then this is interesting here, because basically, so now we're looking at something. This is, again, it's so interesting because it gets into the complexity of a language that involves both phonetics and figurative depictions. So you might look at this, you know, if we got rid of the two-seated people and the plural strokes below them, we might look at this and say, oh, this means black women. But then we clearly see in the classifiers that there is both a man and a woman. So therefore, we have to understand this differently. But we still have to take the T into account. Again, if they just wanted to say black people, if they're saying a plurality of male and female individuals, then they default to the masculine plural, just as many contemporary languages do. You know, if there's a kind of a mixed group of men and women, you can use the masculine plural instead of, and you don't use the feminine plural. The Egyptian language worked the same way. But here we have that T. So now we have to take that T into account. So basically, this now, if we take the T into account, it must describe the abstract notion of that which is black. But then there are people that are said to be belonging to that which is black. So this is a word, this is a grammatical term that is in Semitic languages called a nisba. And it's basically when you take an adjective or concept and make it a noun. So instead of saying like, what's a good example? Instead of saying like the verb to be happy, you say the happy one. And you usually do this by adding a Y, which is unwritten usually in the hieroglyphic writing system because it is a weak consonant, and then additional gender or plural markers. And I think that's what we have going on here. So we have a kind of Y that is not written, and then a plural marker. The plurality is reinforced by the figure of the men and the man and the woman. So basically, this means those who are of Kemet. So maybe those who are of that which is black, those who belong to it, those who are associated with it. In the most general terms, in the way that it's normally translated, in a way that I know, again, I know is causing debate, but might be Egyptians rather than black people.
Okay, that was very definitive. We won't be arguing that anymore.
Another thing too. If they're already black, why do they need to write that they're but hey, not me. I don't want to get.
No, right. I just want to get this because I'm tired of arguing. Friendships is falling apart. You said this Kemet debate will break up friendships. I heard you say it. You was like, man, it get ugly.
Kemet debates should not break up friendships. But again, it's interesting that, it's always, I think, worth asking if discussions are becoming heated, why are they becoming heated? What's at stake here?
Mm.
And just being cognizant of that. And then, because usually what's at stake is not an ancient piece of evidence. It's larger kind of contemporary issues that are then informing our evaluation of the ancient evidence. So to be cognizant of those as well.
Oh, you said that right. You said that right. Can I put this up, Garfield? We got
All
that
right,
one
let
straight.
me X myself out.
So we got that clear. We got that clear. We good. No more arguing over that.
Hey,
Okay.
by the way, as a side note, could Kemet actually mean Jamaicans? I just want to know. So
okay, I know you're familiar with this right here. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna play it. This is you talking. Okay, here we go.
It's really interesting because you have so the interplay of art and text is something that obviously the Medu not only allows but encourages. So in a way, you could even think of these four cattle as being the classifiers of the words. But it's really cool here because we have it's like they're collecting all these, like literally a rainbow of cattle. So the bottom one is the black cattle, the one above it is the red cattle, the one above it is the white cattle, and then the one above it is sob. That means kind of multi pattern. Yeah.
Continue.
No, I mean it's just a really interesting example because and again, what I would say is going on here, because this is in the Temple of Ramses III. And so basically what he's trying to do, what it's in his interest of doing, is to show control, because he's the one that's holding the leashes of all of these cattle, that he's kind of, in control of all the different ethnicities or breeds of cattle, just as he is in control of all the different peoples that might live in the world.
Okay. All right. Got that. Was he trying to, were you trying to say that those cattle is equivalent to people?
Not directly, certainly not. Basically, I was trying to make a point on authoritarian control and kind of patriarchal systems of power. And what they often do is they want to, and we see this in terms of especially empires, where you want to kind of collect different things of diverse origins and kind of put your stamp on it to show your power. And so basically what I was saying is that what Ramses is probably doing here is he's saying, like, look, I am in control of all these different breeds of cattle. So some cattle that are multicolored, some cattle that are white, some cattle that are red, and some cattle that are black. And that this is comparable, not directly equivalent with, but comparable with examples of, for example, the pharaoh smiting people, and these people are kind of represent many different cultures, many different ethnicities. So I was kind of not saying that there was a direct one-to-one comparison here, but just that this is another feature of authoritarian control, where again, what you try to do is you try to first enumerate and describe the world so that then you can collect and control it.
I thought so. I thought I understood it like that, but it was the only way I could find out was to actually ask you, because there was some confusion in that, and I'm not sure it was on purpose, but it was definitely some confusion in that, and that actually helps me understand that more. So
confusion was probably my fault. I probably didn't. I heard it in my voice. I got too excited, and I probably skipped over some things.
Okay, but all right. I'm gonna live with that one, and I actually appreciate that explanation, because there's they're trying to make a correlation between black bulls, and that's why it's black people. Do you see that? Black bulls equate black people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any concrete evidence for that. I see, kind of, again, there's metaphorical connections going on here, maybe.
Okay.
But again, I wouldn't use the term black people. I maybe would say you can see the pharaoh collecting different kind of colors of cattle, just as he collects different ethnicities of people here, but not races of people. Ethnicities meaning kind of people that are labeled as Libyans, people that are labeled as Nubians, people are labeled that as Bedouins, but not people that are labeled as black people.
Okay, I like that. So yeah, you answered some great questions and you cleared it up. I think that the issue was the cattle and the people and those seated people that was repeatedly saying that they was this. So now here's another issue around the word Kim. Like, so there's said not to be actually direct evidence that would state that the black soil. So as a philologist, how do you no, there's no direct evidence, but what are you looking at that would say it makes more sense to be black soil as opposed to some other things, or black people or black skinned people? What are you looking at to find these clues?
Yeah. So essentially, what I would be looking for,
Okay.
if I were looking for a term that described black people,
Okay.
in general, I would be looking for the word chem, which does not have a T, so no feminine, and then is followed by plural strokes and classifiers of men and women.
Okay.
And so there are some resources online that you can kind of of course, there's dictionaries. For example, there's this is kind of the classic, like I'm just learning Egyptian dictionary, or I'm just learning the Meta-Neter dictionary. This is kind of where you go. There's also some online dictionaries that you can kind of look for this. But as far as I know, no one's ever kind of found an attestation of this, or an attestation of it that is frequently used and very clearly used to mean black people. I guess, and again, I think my whole larger point is that this never occurred and that this would not occur, but just simply that we don't have this. And if we do have it, we don't have a lot of it, which means that it was not really the way that the Egyptians wanted to see themselves, which is, again, I think, not surprising given the cultural context and the geographical context that they would have been located in.
Absolutely. They would have seen people ranging in skin color from day one, and it wouldn't have been unusual. I think it was unusual for colonial powers to come in and saying, oh my goodness, look at this. This is different. I could see that, but that environment where people are protected from the sun routinely for 350,000 years, that wouldn't even make sense to start separating divine. But that's how I feel about it. But I think you've answered my questions. Maybe there's one more. Maybe let me see. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this shit. Go ahead.
Actually, do you mind if I chime in? Because one of the things that we were talking about is kind of how a lot of this is related to kind of larger colonial or racial projects from the contemporary world.
Correct.
But I think we could also maybe find some ancient examples of this. But again, ancient examples that are directly connected with imperialism. So we do see kind of, and I know there's colleagues of mine that have worked on this in ways that I'm kind of going outside of my comfort zone here. Okay. So I'd encourage you to look at some of their research. Particularly there's one scholar that I was working with a few years back that has an article on Herodotus and black bodies. And then one of my colleagues in classics at UCLA is looking very much at images of enslaved black children, especially. In the Roman Empire, and like in Rome in the Roman Empire. So not like in Roman Africa. And it does seem to be that I think there is kind of anytime you see this kind of colonialism, whether it's ancient colonialism or modern colonialism, contemporary colonialism, this is when you start to see some of those stereotypes, some of those kind of, this desire to kind of neatly classify a complex world into, especially a complex world that you're not indigenous to. So to oversimplify that in order to make it understandable, and then to make it consumable, and to make it controllable.
So it's a great, so you can actually see a gradation to get to colonial periods for real.
Yeah, and I think you see it. You can see it in colonial periods in the ancient world too, specifically Roman colonization of Roman colonialism, which is kind of the ultimate colonial extraction of Egypt, where they literally go in, they conquer it, they immediately declare it kind of a special province, the emperor's personal province, and then they just literally suck out the resources of it to bring to Rome.
The food, the breadbasket of the world. Based off of that black soil, boy, I tell you. So we kind of spoke earlier on how I felt that it was the black soil that actually gave sway to the culture, being one, a farming community, and two, being the breadbasket of the world. So I always felt like it was the black soil that gave them their indigenousness. What they did, how they describe themselves. How far off am I when I say that? Am I far off? Am I close?
I think you're pretty close. I think this is certainly, and again, the Egyptians understood their world a lot of times in terms of dualities. And I think one of the major dualities that we find is the black land versus the red land.
Correct.
And, we also see this in terms of kind of what gets a city determinative, what gets a foreign land determinative, what gets a hill country determinative. And I think you're quite right that they do associate the black land with kind of, again, a very kind of intrinsic identity of theirs. I almost said Egyptian identity, but I kind of stopped myself there. And again, the term indigeneity is interesting because I think it shows us too that in the ancient world, indigeneity did not necessarily mean that you were born at a certain place, but it means that you've assimilated culturally and been accepted by whatever kind of culture you're now a part of. And a lot of times, again, that was not necessarily the way that your skin color looked, but the cultural affectations, the way that you dressed, the way that you spoke, probably a lot of your mannerisms, maybe even the way you made love, like who knows? These are all part of enculturation. So I view this as, in the ancient world, this is kind of taken as really markers of indigeneity.
Could you explain that term for me? I heard the way you explained it. I understand what it is based off you explained it, but I want the listening audience to understand when you say that, use the term indigeneity.
Sure. So again, when we talk about indigeneity today, it's a really complex term, and I think it's wonderful that it's becoming so important in scholarship and also in kind of the public imagination and the public reality. Again, given the nature of our historical era and kind of the imperative to recover voices that were suppressed for so long. But when it comes to ancient worlds and ancient cultures, I think maybe we need to understand indigeneity a bit differently. And again, perhaps maybe in the ways that it still applies today, but maybe not in the same way. Whereas the belonging to a culture was not necessarily something that was determined by birth, and belonging to a community was not necessarily something that was determined by birth, but it could be kind of, it was instead determined by your acceptance or your conformation to specific cultural norms. So for example, how you dressed, how you spoke, whether you wore, for example, whether you wore white linen, or whether you wore fabrics that were, beautifully woven. One of these was very Egyptian. The other one was very un-Egyptian in the ancient world. And so that these would be part of a larger kind of, and again, also, and this is now part of a speculative kind of imagination that I think is helpful to do. But to put yourself in a world, in an ancient world, before there was mass media, before there were easily consumable images of different people and the different ways that different people looked and behaved. And to think about the process of transforming yourself, we almost view it now as kind of like you can act whatever way you want, or like you can appropriate. I think the word that we use a lot now is appropriate. You could appropriate a lot of different cultures for better or worse. This is simply something that the way that we now consume media has allowed, the way that we now consume sources has allowed. This is not necessarily the case in the ancient world, where, maybe all you knew were the town that you lived in and the nearby towns that you frequented, and maybe, the people that were kind of coming and going from that, and what they brought and what they had to say. And so that the act of assimilating to a different kind of cultural milieu, a different cultural norm, was much more difficult for them than it might seem to us.
Got a question.
Okay.
Why did they paint a lot of the men with like a dark reddish ochre color like? What was the purpose of that?
I don't really know. I don't know why that was the color that they chose. A lot of times it does seem, especially in Old Kingdom art, it seems that the purpose of that color seems to distinguish between male and female. So the women, again, are, especially upper class women, are shown with lighter skin, presumably. And again, as you know, this is something that exists in many, you know, it exists as a cultural bias still today, whereas light skin is valued in areas of the world. You know, I remember being in Egypt in 2006 and watching programming from Dubai or Qatar or Kuwait and seeing ads for skin bleaching cream and just being extremely confused by this, especially as me looking the way that I do. And, in the mid-aughts was obsessed with darkening my skin color. So yeah, I have no idea why they chose that reddish color, but it's the color they chose.
Okay. All right. Any more questions from you, my brother?
Yeah, I had a book. I can't find it. The book is entitled Deaf
Egyptian Magic, my brother.
No, man, goodness gracious, Deaf. It's
Hey,
called
Jonathan, what other projects do you have coming up right now? What are you working on?
So what am I working on? I continue to work on global antiquity as a kind of a new endeavor at UCLA, which basically, you can kind of see where my academic biases are these days, especially in my kind of rant about maps. What global antiquity tries to do is it looks at people across borders and where borders are kind of artificial impositions of authoritarian power that then obscure actual interconnections, actual entanglements in the ancient world, and to view these entanglements and kind of this sense of commonality that we see in ancient sources, or that we can imagine in ancient sources, and use this to reflect on the present situation today. So, what would it be like if we were not obsessed with citizenship in this country, for example, and immigration? What would it look like instead if we kind of focused on our commonalities and cross-cultural entanglements, areas in which we are more connected than we are distinct. So that's one thing. And then I'm also slowly and surely working on my book, which will be a study of Egyptian divine kingship that is based on my dissertation. So hopefully I should be making some good progress on that this summer.
Oh, Egyptian. Okay.
Man,
I'll go one.
About the kingship though. I'm holding Ramesses III down. Who's your infamous king? That's the guy. Who is the guy?
Who is the guy? So I actually don't like any of the guys. I think, again, as we were talking about Kara's book, The Kings. I've grown increasingly suspicious of Egyptian kings as these benevolent shepherds, when in fact they were absolute monarchs that wielded power accordingly. And this should be, and especially as we in this country flirt with authoritarianism, and across the world as different countries flirt with alt-right movements, it's very important to realize this and highlight this, and to realize that kind of the beneficent dictator is not the solution to our problems as they currently exist.
How dare you talk about my Egyptian kings like that? How dare you? You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking that I'm gonna get some hate mail for this. That the Egyptian kings is like we're like 4,000 or 5,000 years away from these guys, man. I think what they were able to do and achieve over a 2,000 to 3,000 year period was pretty good. I think so. Before the New Kingdom, it was pretty. I mean, to unite the lower and the upper and lower Egypt. I mean, that was great for them to do that, man. That was hard.
Because I think because military conquest is actually especially if you have a group of 200 people and a river and ships to sail on that river, it's actually not that hard, I don't think, to move up and down the river and say, okay, you're either with us or against us, and if you're against us, we're gonna pop in every once in a while and just kind of like fuck up your life if you're lucky to keep it.
I get you.
What is actually more difficult then is developing the administrative bureaucracy that keeps this conquest functioning. I think a lot of times we think of this as, and again, I'm included in this. I think of this as the boring kind of stuff. You know, the administrative and logistical achievements, you know, like kind of like how you're keeping track of workers, how you're feeding workers, how you're, you know, how you're paying your tax collectors, things like that, how you're recording your taxes. But this is, I'd say more than, you know, when we think of ancient Egypt and especially the Old Kingdom, we think of the pyramids as kind of like the ultimate achievement. But I think it's interesting to think of how much actually achievements that are invisible to us, the invisible amount of work that went into producing these. And a lot of cases, the invisible amount of work that was not done by the king saying, you do this, but was done by people at the local level, administrators at the local level, liaising with people from the capital. And I think this is kind of what's the really remarkable thing to me about the early Egyptian state.
That's something, because I want to do something, but
okay, you spoke of those pyramids. The thing that has always interested me with the pyramids was maybe the 25-year period it took, but how was the workforce supplied? You know, what was the building mechanisms over time? How did the workforce, how was it put together? The administrating factors of it. And that was the greatest achievement to me, more so than the pyramids itself. I swear, I was like, man, it would take a lot to have a building project over 25 years, have it well organized, make sure the math and the engineers stayed on course. I thought that to be the most spectacular thing in the ancient world. That's how I felt about it.
Yeah, rightly so.
Interesting. So you spoke of Curver's book. What do you think about the 25th dynasty in Pianki and him? She calls him outright imperialist. What do you think about that?
What do I think about that? It's very hard for me to kind of think of these kings in kind of moralistic terms.
He's an imperialist, you know, like imperial power,
Yeah,
colonial power.
I mean, I think they were. It's interesting because I think they I don't think they imagined themselves as imperialists.
Okay.
I think they imagined themselves as kind of, you know, the true believers.
I like that. Go ahead.
And that they were restoring the rightful order of the Nile Valley in its length. So basically spanning Egypt and Nubia, and that they were restoring this order to Egypt, which had to some extent in their view, fallen into chaos.
Can you just explain that a little bit more? What in their mindset, they're going to restore Egypt.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think what the background information to this is that you have to kind of get an understanding of what's going on in northern Egypt, especially, but in Egypt during the Third Intermediate Period.
A lot of vassal kings, right?
Which is, when you get a lot of different kings ruling in ways that, look like anarchy to us, but from perhaps because a lot of these kings are of Libyan origin, and so maintain kind of social structures and tribal structures which are different from those normally or historically practiced in the Nile Valley. So that it's probably a situation where we look at it and we see chaos, but the people that were in charge of it probably saw more order than we do. But I think the Nubian pharaohs certainly looked at this and saw chaos, and then wanted to restore a more traditional pharaonic order, wanted to kind of, again, saw themselves as the bastions of Egyptian culture, of pharaonic culture, now kind of allowing that then historical situation has allowed them to reassert it. And it has been an imperative of theirs to reassert it on the entirety of the Nile Valley.
So, okay, I hear you. So there's people that say, well, the reason they did that because they was the original Egyptians.
And again, I don't think there were originally Egyptians, and I don't think there were originally not Egyptians. Again, these are lines that are I think very artificial. And again, they're more the construct of authoritarian regimes that are, it's always, if you want to control an area, it's always easiest to kind of, see where it's feasible to control, go up to that point, and then tell the people living there that despite interacting with the people south of this line for millennia, that now you are something that they are not, and they are something that you are not. And that these narratives are, coexist with other more realistic narratives, and can be challenged. And I think that's kind of something that you see again from a different authoritarian perspective, but still an authoritarian perspective. I think that's something that you see in the 25th dynasty. I think until the Egyptian First Dynasty placed a border very clearly at Aswan, just south of Aswan, where the first cataract begins, where again it's difficult to exert the same degree of control along the Nile because of the geographic realities of the Nile River at this point, where it turns into rapids. I think that before this point, there was no border between Egypt and Nubia, that these people just saw themselves as being inhabitants of this region. And then it was only when the First Dynasty comes in and says, nope, here's our boundary, that this is where Egypt was created to some extent. But again, is never reflected the reality of the people living there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense right there. That's a great answer. Mm-hmm. Hey, Garfield, you want to ask about the kingship? You said you was writing a book on that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he already commented. What I want to ask you is, do you see more of a royal staple in the earlier kingdoms, or in the middle kingdom, or in the new kingdom, as far as a royalty, as far as kingship carried on based on being relatives towards each other, as far as a royal, passing down the kingship? Or do you see that more in the old kingdom, middle kingdom, or the new kingdom?
I think you see it to a certain degree more and less in every period. Maybe the one exception is, I think we know the Fourth Dynasty is particularly known for its nepotism. So kind of everyone that was, or many members of the elite were members of the royal family. But again, this does not, it seems like, and we see the same thing in actually the early 18th dynasty as well, where you're marrying your sister to try to kind of keep the elites and keep distance between the royal family and the elites. But this inevitably is unsustainable. You see this in every historical period. This has to collapse because again, it's really not sustainable.
I got a new person on Sosa. Do you have any questions, Sosa, or are you just listening? Can't hear you, brother.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I got a question I was interested in is if you look at the because I was looking at this one excerpt from it called the teaching of Ptahhotep. Are you familiar with it somewhat?
Yeah.
Okay, in the passage, right? It because I'm using the TLA and I'm using ChatGPT to kind of get an understanding of it. And in this passage, it talks about it said the quote is, "One does not learn from a scribe who does not know a black person," right? And it says so one does not learn from a scribe who doesn't know a white person, right? So when I go to ChatGPT, it breaks it down as meaning that the black person in that is a scribe who doesn't understand the practical aspect of life, and white is like both points are basically metaphorical, dealing with skill position. Is that accurate?
Without looking at the actual passage, I'm hesitant to offer any type of opinion. I'd need to see the quote itself. And unfortunately, I don't have my edition of Ptahhotep in front of me. But I would say that one of the interesting things, because I'm curious to hear more about how you're using ChatGPT. I find that, or what I've heard, I'm always suspect of using AI when it comes to these kind of things, because AI is more creative and less accurate than you think it's going to be. So it's almost more like you're talking to a person with really interesting ideas, but that this person is not trained in the kind of, traditional rigors of the field. So, so unfortunately, I just feel I don't want to say too much more without looking at the passage itself.
Okay, because some of the problem I'm running into in the community that we're into a lot, right? We see a lot of in Egyptian text, you see black person, white person, red person, but we know that type of construct didn't exist, right? So I
Yeah.
think there has to be something different, right, other than what we're thinking from our 2024 viewpoint.
Yeah, well, to be honest, again, maybe I'm a little confused here because the way, at least the Egyptian text that I'm looking at, and that that I've looked at for the majority of my career, I don't see any of these kind of colorisms. I don't see any black people, white people, red people. I don't see this in the sources. So maybe y'all are understanding kind of different terms a little differently than I am.
The expert.
Oh, I'll try to find the TLA. Maybe the TLA translation is giving me a translation that's not.
You should have shared your screen though.
I'll try to find the exact page. I'm gonna find the TLA because I was reading. I had already had it saved, so I'm gonna find the TLA first, then I'll try and share it.
So
go ahead.
All right. So in your book about the king, where are you talking about the origins of kingship in Egypt? No,
I'm talking more about. To be honest, it's pretty in the weeds in terms of Egyptological scholarship, and I use that in the kind of referring to now the closed door aspect of Egyptological scholarship, where basically I'm responding to this one theory that kind of has purported to be the way that we understand kingship in the New Kingdom, and I'm basically saying that it doesn't really work, and that again, the way that kings connected themselves with their ancestors and with their immediate predecessors and with their heir was kind of more fluid and flexible than this theory will allow.
Okay. All right. So do you have a fundamental understanding on was it multiple pieties on the Nile Valley that would create kingships and would later on down the line unify, or is it one area in particular where the kingship comes from and blesses everyone? Like what's your take on it? I'm just curious.
So I don't really have a take on that. I mean, from what the sources say is that, or what the sources kind of convey to us, the way that the ideology of kingship develops over time. I see that kingship is very early on associated with divinity, and that from there, then they kind of, and perhaps maybe speculating here, but perhaps we could associate this with more of like a charismatic kingship, and that then as it goes on, they need to kind of come up with ways to rationalize this divinity, institutionalize it, and the way that they do it is never through dogma or doctrine. It's always through diversity. So it's by seeing the king as divine, the son of God, human, all at the same time.
Okay. All right. That's a great question. So this is the book I was looking for. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
I'm not.
The Death to Expertise, the Campaign Against Established Knowledge and Why It Matters. So for the community, as we promote scientific racism, we feel it's important to have expertise and to get some type of credentials and training. Now, there were certain points you were making that were very nuanced and very detailed. So what would you say to the average novice such as myself, or that there are some novices that can read text expertly, right? What advice would you give to them to further their training? How should you further your training? Should you like sit with somebody like you and get some training, or should you just sit back on YouTube and just learn yourself and hope you get it right? How's that working?
I would say keep it up. I would say definitely keep up the training, but make sure you're using it or you're pursuing your training in a variety of ways. So you don't I'd say I would recommend not just concentrating on only reading the ancient texts.
Okay.
You also want to be reading, it's fine to to consume and to learn via YouTube and other social media platforms. It's great that we have this.
Okay.
But I think you also want to learn from, kind of more established fields. You want to go to maybe Egyptological scholarship and even kind of the ugly bits of Egyptological scholarship and say, well, why did they come up with these weird schemes the way that they did? Also, I think it's important to think more broadly than Egyptology. If you want to kind of look at these sources, again, as you kind of just expertly showed that you're more concerned. You're concerned with these issues, not just for the issue of ancient Egypt, but you're more concerned with kind of, again, these movements against expertise in the modern day. And I think these questions are very important. And it's very important to do reading on these kind of matters that gets you out of the ancient world, that makes kind of what you're doing, that can make what you're looking at and what you're looking into more relevant for the present day. So whether this be kind of classic theoretical sources, anthropological sources, media criticism, things like that, all of these I think are very important to pursue in tandem.
Okay, I like that. Okay, so say we have people that don't have the formal training and they have these ideas. How do they crack? Okay, because I have some friends that really, I got that work. And I'm saying, I don't know if you got that work. I want to see you play it at the highest level. Then I can see if you got that work. That's like being an NBA player, claiming to be, I'm the best basketball player, but you ain't tried it in the NBA yet. You don't really know where you at. Yeah. So what's the best advice that you have for novice like me trying to crack the field and say, yo, I got an idea here. And I want the world to critique it and see it. What's the best mode on doing that? What would you suggest?
I think the best strategy is to be humble with your knowledge. And I say this both in a way of kind of honesty and also manipulation. Manipulation in the best way. So honesty, we should all be humble about the limits of our knowledge. This is, again, one thing that as you read more, and I think one of the signs, this is kind of like the foundations of knowledge. This is kind of classical Socrates here, that the more you know, you actually realize that you know less than you thought you did. Wow. And that there's so much more that you don't know, and there's so much more to question and be unsure of. So I'd say that this is kind of always a good perspective to take, because it's an anti-patriarchal perspective. Again, it goes back to that kind of unknowing that we talked about earlier in our discussion. So I think that's always a good perspective to take. Now, from the manipulation side, if you email a scholar and you say, I know exactly what I'm doing, like, this is what I've discovered, and tell me, like, validate me. Okay. I think if you think about that from the perspective of the scholar that you're emailing, that's a kind of a risky approach, because it's very, again, scholars exist in as many varieties and personality types as, there are people. So some people might read that and they might say, okay, yeah, great. Like, let's see what you thought up with, and I'll give you some feedback. Other people are going to read that and they're going to say, well, what does this person think that they know? Like, they didn't write a PhD, they didn't go to graduate school, and dismiss it outright. Other people are going to say, well, it's an interesting idea, and I'm glad that they're, engaging with this, but they seem to be taking themselves very seriously, and I'm not sure they'd be open to criticism. So I'm not going to really engage seriously with these ideas. So it's always good to kind of take a humble approach and be like, look, I'm thinking about this. This is kind of something I've been mulling over. Do you have any ideas or suggestions? Because I think you're more likely to get again, this is the manipulative side of it. You're more likely to get a response from people from that approach than you are from saying, like, I am the expertly trained and I've taught myself, because then, you're opening yourself up for potential criticism if someone wants to be critical.
I hear you. I like that approach. I'll have a couple conversations and say, look, you might want to try this approach here. I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson say one time, he said, we know enough to know when we right, but most people don't know enough to know when they wrong.
I think we don't even know enough to say when we're right. I think a lot of times when we say we're right, it's kind of a consensus, but this is not, there's no ultimate truth.
Right, absolutely. That's what we learned about the universe, academic and science. There's no ultimate truth. Matter of fact, scientists aren't even interested in truth. It's approximates. Go ahead, Garfield. I got
a question for Jonathan Winnerman from Clubhouse. This is a question for you from a sister by the name of Muriel. And go ahead, sister, ask a question.
Yeah, so what I want to know is what's the symbolism of the contention between Horus and Set.
Ooh. So if I heard the question correctly, because it was a little quiet, what's the symbolism of the relationship or the kind of conflict between Horus and Seth?
Yes, yes.
So in true Egyptian fashion, this is a great question, because the way that the people that lived in the ancient Nile Valley like to problem solve is they like to not come up with one answer to something, but they like to come up with many different answers. So it's almost like if you were given the number, 4, and, we would say, oh, that's because it's 2 plus 2. Well, the Egyptians would say, okay, well, that's one way of looking at it. But you could also understand it as 3 plus 1, 8 divided by 2, 2 times 2, in kind of, so basically they understand an issue by circling around it and looking at every possible approach to it. And then that kind of creates a deeper truth, a deeper kind of a more holistic view of what you're talking about. So I'd view the relationship between Horus and Seth in the same way. So on the one hand, you have later Egyptian sources kind of saying, well, Horus is lower Egypt, Seth is upper Egypt. So then that's one way to understand it. You could also understand it as Horus is all of Egypt and Seth is all of the foreign lands. So a lot of different ways of, like any country that was not the Nile Valley was in some way understood to be the domain of Seth. But again, you notice that this contradicts the first interpretation of Seth having Upper Egypt. Now he's been pushed entirely out of Egypt itself and only gets the deserts and foreign lands. Another way to look at it is that, especially if you look at the body parts that they're most associated with, where Horus is associated with the eye and Seth is associated with his testicles, which is why it's these two areas that get attacked by by Horus and Seth respectively during their fight. And this might then indicate that in some way, Seth represents kind of male, unbridled male strength and male potency, whereas Horus represents kind of governorship or observation, surveillance, healing, something like that. So there's a bunch of different ways of understanding this relationship, and each are valid. And a lot of times they contradict one another as well. So this is also an interesting thing that when you're, going back to kind of Ankh's question, when you're doing outside research and you find kind of contradictory sources, they might not actually be contradicting one another. They might just be different approaches for understanding the same problem.
All right, thank you. Hold on, one more question. Anybody else with any questions?
No, I forgot what question. It's never to be understood literal.
So the story never to be understood literally.
Hard to say. Very hard to say. I mean, I think for me as a scholar, I'd say I would argue against understanding the story literally, especially when you actually read the contendings itself. This is a wild story. It's filled with all these contradictions.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Of like Isis clearly supporting Horus the entire way, and then at one point she's just like, well, I've been a little too biased, so now I'm going to throw a harpoon in my son. So basically the way that we think that this text was constructed was by going through a lot of different magical spells, because the way that we think that Egyptians understood myth was not that there was like one specific version of the myth, but that there were a lot of different ways that you could tell the story to affect different ends. And so what the contendings of Horus and Seth seems to have done is it seems to have gone through all of these to try to create a narrative. But this narrative was then filled with contradictions, because sometimes you have Horus and Seth being brothers. Sometimes you have, being uncle and nephew. This is why you get them being like, oh, well, we don't know who should be king. Let's email. Let's ask Cyrus. He'll know, and I'm sure he'll have an unbiased opinion, and that's not, of course, how it works.
All right, thank you. Hey, thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you.
So just looking at the time, do you mind if we start to wrap up, just because unfortunately I need to do less fun things with my day?
I say less fun things. What happened to you, Sosa? Sosa died out. Died. No.
No, I'm listening. I'm listening. I came late, so I'm listening.
You couldn't find it. You couldn't find what you were looking for.
No, I couldn't find it. I'm not. My expertise is not there with that TLA just quite yet, like I needed to be.
The TLA is a beast to work with.
It's a beast.
Yeah, I got to familiarize myself with a little bit more.
So how? Okay, we know what. I don't even want to ask that question. I think you did a great job of explaining your position and clarifying some things for us, and that's what I needed. And I just think the community will be in a better place after your conversation. It has brought clarity to a lot of debates and arguments, and we do not revel in absolutes. And I'm glad we got that off. That's important. And like I said, just understanding the ancient world in Africa and the diversity of Africa, I think that's important for not only the African American community, but the world at large, man. So I appreciate this conversation. It was had at a high level, and we big up to you.
Did he explain the Did he explain the perception from north to south?
No, he didn't. But
we didn't ask that. But if you want to ask him right now and close out the show with that, that's fine with me.
Oh yeah. One last one on the way out, because they were, when they heard your first interview, I think people were kind of befounded with that question when it said their north. You said that our north is their south. We're talking about the ancient Egyptians.
Yeah.
So when they say that they're going south, does that mean they're going north in our perspective?
So they don't use the terms. They don't use the terms again. Like we have terms north and south. That but the way that I wouldn't necessarily say that when they say north they mean south, because they do have words for north that mean our north, and they have words for south that mean our south. But that they orient their world so that the top is where our south is, and the bottom is where our north is. So basically, the Egyptians are looking at the world as if the highest point and the origin of kind of the top is the source of the Nile. So they're orienting themselves from that way, and just kind of has as water flows through all of us, so the water flows through the country in the same way. So the head of the country is in the south, and literally in the hieroglyphic script, the butt is in the north.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Hey, Jonathan, I want to say thank you, man, for taking the time out. I mean, and definitely when your book comes out, I want to definitely help you to promote it. Yeah, you bring a lot to the conversation.
Oh man,
appreciate you taking the time out, man. This has been wonderful, beautiful, and let's do some more reconstruction. No pun intended.
The reconstruction.
No, it's been wonderful. And I just want to say thanks to you all. It's been a wonderful conversation, and let's be in touch.
Okay,
yes,
appreciate you.
All right,
Jonathan. Peace.
Take care, guys.
All right, man.